Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Nursery Production and Management. This morning's video topic is the bare root production of plant material. So what exactly do we mean when we say bare root plant material? What this means is that a nursery is going to line out liners in a field, and they're going to grow those plants anywhere from 1 to 3 years in the field. When the plants are ready to be harvested, they're going to come through with a machine called a digger. Some people may call it an undercutter. And they are going to dig these plants up out of the ground and shake all the soil off the root system. And then these plants are going to be graded and bundled, and they're going to be stored until they can be sorted for orders. In this picture, you see healed-in bare root fruit trees. So healing in is simply the process of taking some type of moist packing material and shoveling it around the roots of bare root plants. And this material could be aged bark, it could be compost or some other type of similar material. This is a temporary method of storing bare root plants until they can be either potted up or transplanted to the field. Let's take a look at where in the United States bare root commodities are grown. And this data is a little bit old. I think it comes from 2006, but it'll give us a general idea of who's producing bare root plants. Oregon and Washington are leaders in the production of bare root deciduous trees. California and Oregon are leaders in the production of bare root deciduous shrubs. Fruit and nut trees are grown all across the United States, with New York State being a leader. Back in 2006, Tennessee was the leading producer of bare root ground covers and vines. And finally, if you're talking about herbaceous perennial plants, a lot of those come from Holland. Holland is a very large producer of this commodity class. With any production system, there are going to be advantages and disadvantages of using that system. And some of the production systems that we briefly mentioned before have been balled and burlap production, container production, and now we're talking about the bare root production of plant material. So let's go ahead and consider some of the advantages and disadvantages of the bare root production process. One big advantage is that bare root plants are very lightweight. Bare root plants do not have a soil ball around the root system like a balled and burlap plant would have, and there's no container, so there's no potting medium. Essentially, all you have is just the weight of the plant itself. So the plants are lightweight. This is going to result in reduced shipping costs because the plants are not heavy. You're not growing the plant in a container, so you don't have any container costs, and you don't have any costs for potting medium. You don't have a soil ball around the root system like you have with balled and burlap plants. And because you're growing the plants in the field, generally speaking, a field production uses less water in comparison to container plant production. In the end, your product is going to be less expensive compared to other similar products of the same species and size that have been produced using other production methods. On the disadvantage side, one major disadvantage is the narrow planting window associated with bare root plants. And this is a concern for the end user. So whoever is purchasing the bare root plants, they're going to have a relatively narrow window to get these plants either potted up or transplanted to the field. A lot of bare root plants are going to be planted in the spring. In fact, the majority of bare root plants will be planted in the spring. Obviously, if you live in a northern climate, you can't do any planting outside until the soil thaws. But you want to make sure that you get the plants either potted up or in the ground before bud break. You can plant bare root material in the fall as well. And generally you want to do that when plants are dormant, but before the soil freezes. Another consideration is that the root systems of bare root plants always need to be protected against desiccation or drying out. So that's something you always need to keep in mind. You can't leave bare root plants lying exposed to the sun and to the wind because the roots are going to dry out and consequently they're going to be damaged. You always want to try to maintain bare root plants in a dormant condition. And there are a couple ways that we can achieve this. One is using cold storage, which is going to be temperature and humidity controlled. But not every nursery is going to have cold storage. Cold storage facilities can be expensive. An alternative way of storing bare root plant material is to heel them in outdoor beds like we saw in that previous picture. But remember that this is just a temporary holding situation. Outdoor healing in beds are not temperature or humidity controlled. Larger bare root orders, especially of trees, are generally going to be shipped in refrigerated trailers. Smaller orders, smaller plants that can be placed in boxes are generally going to be shipped using carriers like FedEx or UPS. These plants are not going to be shipped in refrigerated trailers. It's important for the sellers of bare root plant material to always keep in mind the weather conditions and to try to avoid shipping bare root plants during extremely cold periods where the boxes may freeze on the truck, potentially damaging the plants. And then finally, another disadvantage to using bare root plant material is that some bare root plant material may require sweating. Let's talk a little more about sweating so we can understand what causes plants to require this treatment and how we can accomplish this treatment. Most bare root tree and shrubs can be stored in refrigerated cold storage all winter, and they'll develop normally when planted or potted in the spring. However, there are a few species slash genera of plant material whose buds become extremely dormant during prolonged periods of cold storage. These species/plant genera must be forced into breaking bud before they are lined out, and this process is called sweating. Let's briefly consider 3 different methods that can be used to sweat plants. One of the simplest methods is to place the bundles of plant material in a warm, humid greenhouse or polyhouse. The plant's bundles can be covered up with an additional sheet of plastic. The idea is you want to create a warm, humid environment that's going to wake up the tops of these bare root plants and get the bud swelling process started. A second method of sweating bare root plant material can be done outdoors in large livestock watering troughs. The bundles of bare root plants can be inserted into the troughs horizontally, upright, and then water can be added to the trough. And the idea is to soak the root systems of the bare root plants for several days to get the plants hydrated and to wake up the top of the plant. Finally, a third method that can be used to sweat plants requires some type of a storage shed or garage that can be maintained at a temperature between 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And the process involves laying the bundles of plant material side by side on a bed of straw and then covering the root systems of the bundles with additional straw and then moistening the straw with water. Also, a piece of clear polyethylene plastic can be pulled over the entire batch of bundled plants. And again, you're creating warm, humid conditions to try to wake up the top of the plant. You would check the plants daily for bud break. When you see bud break, then that's your signal to take the plants out to the field or pot them up. When you watch the full PowerPoint version of this presentation, be sure to look at this video called Sweating Bare Root Nursery Stock at Bailey's Nursery. Bailey's Nursery is a large nursery located in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And this video specifically explains how they sweat bare root nursery stock. All right, so this is what you're looking for. If you're in the process of sweating plants, what you're looking for is what you see in the picture on the left-hand side of your screen. So this is a picture of bud swell on lilac. So when you see the buds swell and start to turn green, then you know that you have successfully woken up the buds of that plant. And it's time to remove those plants from the sweating environment and either pot them up or transplant them to the field. The picture on the right actually shows what we call bud break. So bud break occurs after bud swell, and bud break is when the plant is actually beginning to push out new leaves and stems. So certainly by the time you see bud break, it's definitely time to get those plants potted up or transplanted to the field. The following is a list of plant genera which may require sweating. Serviceberry in the genus Amelanchier. Birch in the genus Betula. barberry in the genus Berberis, hornbeam in the genus Carpinus, hackberry in the genus Celtis, redbud in the genus Cerces, hawthorns are in the genus Crataegus, mulberries, genus Morus, cinquefoil in the genus Potentilla, pears in the genus Pyrus, oaks in the genus Quercus, and finally roses in the genus Rosa. So if you watch the Bailey video, the presenter in that video mentions that there are really 3 or 4 genera in particular that require sweating. And those are the hackberries, redbuds, oaks, and the roses. All right, so let's move on to the production process. So the process will vary in length depending upon the crop that you're producing. And really this is a function of the size or grade that you want to achieve before you harvest the plants. If you want to grow plant material to a larger grade, it's pretty obvious that the plants are going to need to stay in the ground additional time, which is going to add some additional years to the production cycle. In the slides that follow, we're going to focus primarily on the bare root production of shrubs. So really the first step in the production process is going to be lining out. And lining out is simply the process of taking a small starter plant that we call a liner and planting it in field rows. And the best soil type for the production of bare root plants is going to be a sandy loam soil. So if you're selecting a site for the production of bare root plants, it's always important to consider the soil type, the soil texture, because you want a sandy loam soil because when you dig the plants are going to come out of the ground easier, and you're going to be able to shake off the soil more effectively from the root system. If you choose a soil that's high in clay, it's going to be more difficult to lift the plants up out of the ground. You might end up tearing or breaking roots. Also, sandy loam soils tend to drain well, and they tend to dry out faster, which means that you can get back in the field to do your work. Generally speaking, lining out is going to occur in the spring after the fields have been prepared for planting. So field preparation would generally include disking, possibly followed by harrowing. These are methods to break up soil clods and level the ground in preparation for lining out. So what you see pictured here are high quality branched rooted cuttings. So really this is a liner production bed. Now this could be done by the same nursery that is going to grow the bare root plant material. or these liners could have been produced by a different nursery and then sold. In either case, you have to start with a liner, and preferably you want a liner that's well branched and has a good root system. Okay, this machine is called a transplanter, and this is being pulled by a tractor through the field. And you can see the two operators sitting in the chairs. They have bins where the liners can be placed. And as this machine moves through the field, they reach down and insert liners into the little furrow that's created by the shoe. And then behind, there are two sweeps that push the soil back into the furrow. And then you can see the two press wheels that firm or compact the soil as the transplanting machine moves through the field. So this is an effective way for transplanting shrubs, and they make machines that are specific to transplanting tree liners as well. So shrubs will spend anywhere from 1 to 3 years in the field, and that's going to depend upon the cultivar that's being grown and the size plant that you want to grow. It's common for many nurseries to cut the plants back at the end of their first year in the field to encourage branching. And this will help produce a more highly branched, superior product. So in this picture, you're looking at a field of 2-year-old plants. And you can see that the plants are uniform in size. They're well branched and they are ready for harvest in the fall. Now, of course, when you're growing plants in the field, there are several cultural practices that you're going to need to employ. For example, you're going to have to keep the weeds in check. And generally, this can be done by cultivating with a tractor. The plants are also going to need fertilizer. They're going to need to be watered. There may need to be additional insect or pest treatments applied during the time the plants are in the field. Bare root plants are harvested in the fall of the year after the plants have gone dormant. There is something called a starch test that can be used to confirm dormancy. So let me talk a little bit about a starch test. A starch test involves taking several small pieces of roots, cutting them into circular shaped discs, and then treating them with an iodine stain. When the iodine stain comes in contact with starches, the stain will turn a blue color, indicating the presence of starches. Starches are a good thing. Starches are a storage form of carbohydrates, and we'll talk more about this in a second. Let's go ahead and review some basic plant physiology. So during the growing season, the leaves of any plant are going to be performing a process called photosynthesis. So let's go ahead and write that reaction down just to review it. So during photosynthesis, the plants are going to be taking carbon dioxide plus water And this is going to be occurring in the presence of light. And the plants are going to be making oxygen and sugar. Now, the specific type of sugar that's produced is called glucose. Okay, these sugars are going to be translocated. Translocation is just a fancy way of saying moved around. So the sugars are made by the leaves during this process called photosynthesis, and then the sugars are translocated through a tissue called the phloem to various places throughout the plant where sugars are needed. These are called sinks. One of the sinks or places where these sugars are going to go is into the root system of the plant. So let me go ahead and kind of use my red marker to draw the movement of sugars or the translocation of sugars from the leaves where they're produced through the phloem tissue of the branches into the phloem tissue of the trunk, and then finally into the phloem tissue of the roots. Okay, some of these sugars are going to be converted into starches, and they're going to be stored in the cortex tissue of the roots. And this is a good thing. We want this to happen because those stored sugars or starches are going to represent the food energy that will be available to the tree or shrub the following spring when it starts to leaf out again. And this is important. It's important that there be some stored food that that plant can use to leaf out the following spring. All right, so this is what happens in early spring. So in the last slide, we saw that during the summer growing season, the plant is producing glucose, and then that glucose is being converted into starches, and those starches are being stored in the cortex tissue of the root system. That's one place. That's not the only place where starches are going to be stored. And then the plant is going to go through the dormant season, that is winter, and then the following spring in Texas, this could be as early as sometime in late February into mid-March, the plant is going to begin growing again. So what happens is we have to get those sugars that are stored as starches in the root system of the trees and shrubs. We have to move those sugars back up to the growing points of the stems. Specifically, we need to get those sugars to the buds so that those buds can begin to swell, which is a process that we discussed earlier, and eventually those buds will break, and that means they're going to push out leaves and stems. So in early spring, the process kind of runs in reverse. So if you look at the bottom of the diagram, in the roots, the starches are converted back into sugar, so that's occurring in the root tissue down here. And then those sugars are going to move through a different tissue. They're not going to move through the phloem this time. They're going to move in a tissue called sapwood, and sapwood is one type of xylem. So these soluble sugars are going to move with water. So the sugars are going to be dissolved in water, and they're going to move through the sapwood tissue, and they're going to move basically in this direction from the roots, from the sapwood of the roots into the sapwood of the trunk, into the sapwood of the branches, finally making their way up to where the buds are so that those sugars can provide the food energy that will be required for bud swell followed by bud break. So it's really important that in the fall of the year, before we harvest bare root plant material, that we do a starch test to make sure that we have enough starches stored in the root system so that the following spring the plants can successfully leaf out. So this picture shows some of the little sections of root that have been stained with the iodine. Now they're being examined under a microscope to determine whether there is a sufficient quantity of starches present to go ahead and initiate the harvest process. As it turns out, besides being an indicator of dormancy, a starch test can also be used as an overall indicator of plant health. I will be posting an article to the lesson folder for this week. It's called Starch Analysis, and it's a technical report that's published by the Bartlett Tree Company. So I would like you to go ahead and read this report. It's pretty short, it's an easy read, but there will be some questions on future exams and quizzes regarding the information in this report. So please read it. So after the starch test has been done and after dormancy is confirmed, then the plants are going to be lifted from the fields using a machine called a digger. The digger will undercut the plants, lift them up out of the field, and shake any residual soil off the roots. In this picture, you're looking at a tractor that's pulling a brand of digger called a Lundby plant lifter. So let me see if I can highlight some of the parts of this machine for you. And again, I'll use my marker to do that. So if you noticed right here where I just drew the arrow, so that is a undercutting blade. So that blade goes down into the soil and it slices through the soil. It does cut some of the root system. That's inevitable. You can't avoid that. And then what happens is it lifts the bare root plants up out of the soil onto some shakers. And those shakers are located kind of right in this area. Excuse me, it's hard to see them because they're covered by plants, but those shakers kind of bounce up and down. And the idea is you want to shake off the soil from the root systems of these plants. And again, that's why it's important to have the right kind of soil texture for a bare root production process. Okay, after the digger goes through the field, the bare root plants are laid in windrows off to one side, and then eventually a large truck right here comes by and the crew loads the bare root plants onto the truck. And in this case, the truck will take the plants into the cold storage facility where they will be graded and bundled. Some nurseries are experimenting with using a hay baler to speed up the process. In the previous slides, after the plants were dug by the digger, they were laid in windrows, and then crews of people would need to come by and lift those plants up and place them onto the bed of that large truck so they could be delivered to cold storage. So using a hay baler like this eliminates some of the labor. So the plants are still dug by the digger and the plants are still laid in windrows. And then after that's done, a tractor pulling the baler will come directly over that windrow and grab all those plants and form them into what's called a loose bale. So this is an image of what a loose bale of plants looks like. So there are probably thousands of plants in that big bale. And the bale is loose, so it's not wrapped with twine very tightly. So there's a minimum breakage of stems and roots. And then what can happen is a forklift can come out in the field and pick up that bale all at once and put it on the back of the truck to bring these plants into cold storage, where these large bales would be opened up and then the grading and bundling process would begin. Now, this method of baling plants is not suitable for all types of plant materials. It's not something that would work if you were digging trees, for example. So it really only works on shrubs that have, relatively flexible stems. Um, it's not suitable for all types of plants. I highly encourage you to watch this video called Harvesting Fruit Trees at Dave Wilson Nursery. So this is a really cool video that shows a large tree digger driving right over the top of rows of trees in the field and digging them. So it works in much the same fashion that that Lundeby digger works, except that this is a very tall, high clearance tree digger, and it's a fascinating video to watch. Okay, following harvest, the plants are going to be moved into some type of storage facility. Inside the storage facility, the plants are going to be graded and bundled. After grading and bundling, the plants are either going to be stored in cold storage or in healing in beds located outdoors. So when you talk about refrigerated cold storage, we're talking about a facility that can maintain a temperature somewhere between 34 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit with 98% relative humidity. So it's cold enough to maintain the plants in a dormant condition, and it's also very humid. And this is important because we mentioned earlier that you never want the root systems of bare root plants to dry out. Well, at 98% relative humidity, that's not going to be a problem. Some cold storage facilities are enormous, the size of football fields. Other cold storage facilities are essentially the size of small rooms. It all depends. Okay, this is one of the enormous cold storage facilities located at Bailey's Nursery. So you can see several tree liners that have been graded and bundled. And then the bundles are placed in these racks, and these racks are stacked up right to the ceiling of the cold storage facility. So when the plants arrive from the field, they are graded. In the case of trees, the grading is going to be by caliper. In the case of shrubs, they're going to be graded by height. Then they're going to be bundled anywhere from, trees may have 5 to 10 per bundle. Shrubs may be 10, 15, 20, 25 per bundle. It really just depends on the size of the plant material and how many plants you can fit in a bundle. Okay, after the product has been bundled, in the case of Bailey's, it's going to be stored on these racks. And then at some point in early spring, they're going to begin to pull orders. So they're going to drive around with a forklift and they're going to find the various plants that they need to complete an order. And they're going to pull those orders off the racks and start to process the order. Healing in beds are really just temporary outdoor plant storage areas. There is no temperature control and there is no humidity control. So here's a picture of some trees that have been healed in to a sandy loam soil. So they can stay like this as long as the weather remains cold. But the minute things start to warm up and those buds start to swell and possibly break, then you have some problems. So remember that outdoor healing in areas are just temporary storage areas. You can't keep plants dormant forever in an outdoor healing in bed. The shipping of bare root plant material generally starts in the spring of the year. Nurseries will make their earliest shipments to the warmest zones. So in Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we are in Zone 8, and we're talking about the USDA zones of plant hardiness. So nurseries will ship to the warmest zones first, simply because the weather is going to start improving in those zones earlier, and they're going to need the plants earlier. Shipping to the colder zones will come later. The roots must always be protected during shipment. And every effort should be made to try to maintain the plants in a dormant state during shipment. This is sometimes easier said than done. I mentioned earlier that bare root trees are typically shipped in refrigerated trailers. In a refrigerated trailer, it's relatively easy to maintain the temperature low enough to keep the plants dormant. Smaller plants are going to be packed into boxes and shipped by various ground carriers. In this case, it's more difficult to maintain the plants in a dormant condition because you really have no control over the temperature inside one of those delivery vans. Larger products like trees will essentially be laid onto the floor of a refrigerated trailer, and then some type of moist packing material will be placed over the root system of the trees. But smaller products like shrubs are going to be boxed. In this picture, you're looking at a product called cedar shingle tow. And this is a byproduct of the cedar shingle manufacturing process. Essentially, shingle tow is the saw kerf that's collected as a waste product when shingles are made. And this product can be used as a packing material around the root systems of both bare root trees and shrubs. How are bare root plants used? Landscape contractors really don't use a lot of bare root plants. They may use some, but typically landscape contractors or landscapers are going to be more interested in larger balled and burlap plants, larger container grown plants, or larger boxed trees. Garden centers and other nurseries, however, do use bare root plant material either to pot up or to grow on in the field. Many bare root plants are harvested and then sold retail as mail order plants. I thought this was an interesting picture because it shows how long it would take to finish a 1 year old, 12-inch tall bare root shrub. Now, this particular shrub is called ninebark. That's the common name. And ninebark is in the genus Physocarpus. So if you were to start with a 1 year old, 12-inch tall bare root plant and pot it up in a container, it would take approximately 100 days to grow it into a finished product. So think about it. You pot up the liner, and then basically 3 months later, you have a finished plant that you could sell. As mentioned earlier, bare root trees are going to be graded by their caliper. And caliper, again, refers to the diameter of their stems. In the full PowerPoint version of this presentation, if you click on this hyperlink, it will take you to a page that describes the tree grades at Bailey's Nursery. So that's interesting to look at. Shrubs are going to be graded by their height. And then finally, this is one last video that you can look at in the full PowerPoint version of this presentation. And this is called Bare Rooting Large Trees. And this video describes how some arborists are using a tool called an air spade. So an air spade is a tool that requires an air compressor, and it basically blasts out a jet of highly compressed air that you can use to excavate the root systems of different sized plants. And they're doing some amazing work with air spades. And in this little video, they're describing how an arborist is able to dig a tree in full leaf during the middle of the summer using an air spade and then successfully transplant it to another location. Truly an amazing video and an amazing tool, so I encourage you to watch this. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this video presentation on the bare root production of plant material. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.